So migration is very important for global development, and therefore consequences of migration is important for us to understand. The consequences of migration is actually felt at two different levels. First is the individual level, and second is the collective level, which is nation states. So if a migrant is moving from the place of origin to a place of destination, or population is moving from one place to other place, the consequences are felt both at origin and destination, and felt differently at the individual and the collective level, which is nation state level. Now if you look at the individual level, what are the major consequences of migration? So if you look at most of these migration theories, immigration has a largely positive effect for the immigrants and the employers who are hiring them. So at the individual level, if you look at how migration is impacting these individuals and the firms who are hiring them, so by and large evidence suggests it is a positive deal for both of them. However, if we were looking at migration problems and policies, it's very important for us to understand the impact of these movements on migration at the collective level also, which is the nation state level. So the major question is that what are the collective effects of migration on origin and destination population? So because we know that there are various set of factors which are working at the places of origin, which are actually pushing people to move out, and there is possibly, though imperfect, set of factors which are working at the place of destination, which attracts and pull people to come and work at place of destination. And so in this way, if you know that there are different set of factors working, we need to understand the consequences at the collective level for both the place of origin and destination. So we know that migration can affect both the size and growth rates of population at the place of origin and at the place of destination. Now imagine if the place of origin happens to be a small village, and if a large chunk of population is moving out from a village and going to a relatively large city, developed city, so the impact at the place of origin is going to be very devastating. Why? Because the size of village is so small, and if a large chunk of people are living out from a village and going to settle down in a large city or a country which is developed, so at the place of origin, the potentially most skilled, energetic workforce, potentially in the working age group, has left the ship. So by and large, the development prospects or the possibility of development in these villages is completely lost, largely lost. However, at the place of destination where these large chunk of people from villages are going to cities, but cities are already very large in population size, very diverse, so these number of people, who are coming from villages, they actually does not make much difference to a general population living in a very large and developed cities. So in this way we can understand that how the size and the growth of settlements at the place of origin and destination are impacted by migration. So because of migration, we observe the change in size and growth of the labor force at both the places of origin and also in the place of destination. Now talking about the labor force, why labor force moves from one place to another? Of course, because of largely a couple of reasons. One is the differential wage rates at the place of origin and destination. So for instance, if daily wage laborers in Jaunpur district is getting close to 400 and 500 rupees, and if he or she understand that he or she can get 1000 rupees for the same kind of job in Mumbai or in Delhi, so he or she would prefer to rather work in cities and making better life for himself and for the family than working in the native places. So differential wage rate is a very important stimuli for people to move depending upon their skill set from one place to other place. And secondly, if you look at international migration, many developed nations which are experiencing population aging are actually facing the problem of qualified, skilled, energetic young labor force. And often these labor force, whose number is dwindling in the Western countries, also are very expensive, the native labor force. And so therefore they have an incentive to hire people from abroad who are not very expensive, who are willing to work as hardly, as productively at lower wages. So in this sense, there are implications on the size and the growth of the labor force, both at the place of origin and at the place of destination. So therefore, migration has an important role to play in global labor force supply, and implications both at the area of origin and the destination. And of course, third important issue here is that how the migration is impacting social and cultural composition, both at the place of origin and destination. So we know that migration is essentially a very selective process. And when this migration happens, you have a set of people of a particular age category, gender category, skill set, with the particular cultural and social backgrounds moving out from place A to place B. So where they are going, they face a lot of challenges for their integration, assimilation, acceptance as a national in the foreign land. And so therefore there are a lot of implications both on the positive and the negative sides that of course we will be discussing shortly. So if you think that the question of collective consequences of migration is really a population problem, means what are the consequences of migrants at the national and state level? I think if you have to answer this question, there are 2-3 important views that we have to focus. First, we have to understand to examine who views these consequences as the source of migration, source of problem. If migrant were a problem, then from whose perspective they are a problem? Second is what the perceived problems are. So what these migrants are doing that is actually leading to some sort of problem. And third is why they are considered to be a problem. So these sort of questions are presented before us if we were to understand the consequences of migrants. First is from whose viewpoint or perspective migration is a problem. Second, what is the nature of this problem? And third is why they are considered to be problems. So if you look at most of nations in contemporary world have framed their respective migration policies, and the whole idea is to curtail or to manage the movement of people between international borders. And so therefore these migration policies, which are nothing but national policies, are tailored according to meeting the national needs of development and progress. So if you look at international migration, generally is viewed as positive for both the sending and the receiving nations. However, increasing number of countries today view that at least some consequences of migration or emigration has some problem. So there is a growing tendency of countries to intervene politically in immigration and emigration streams, and so there is a declining willingness to leave migration unchecked. We are all born in this world as a free bird, but if you look at gradually with world becoming complex, a lot of contestations, globalization, business, resource exploitation, so gradually policies have been framed to check the movement of people from one territorial boundary to the other. Now this is an important slide. If you can look at this slide, in early 1970s, most of the developed countries in the West, from Americas, Europe, etc., discourage immigration, which is international immigration in their borders, while during the same time in the 1970s, less developed countries were encouraging immigration. Immigration means they were welcoming foreigners to come and work for them. So the reason was, why then the developed countries was discouraging immigration, because they were thinking about, if the immigrants will come here, they will take jobs, and the opportunity will be lost. On the other hand, the less developed world economies were looking for technological assistance, financial assistance, so they were welcoming the immigration. However, recently this trend has completely reversed. So if you look at the UN statistics of 2011, the trends have reversed, and you can observe that most developed countries today have migration policies to encourage immigration, and this is largely driven by population aging, wherein there is a scarcity of people, those who are there in the working age group, and of course because the native population, the wage rates are very high, so therefore they are, instead of looking for working with people who are very senior, they are looking for people from abroad who are young, early in their lifetime, and they can work at lower wage rates. On the other hand, if you look at the low developed countries, they are now discouraging immigration, because a lot of problem which they have at their own level. One of the biggest problem is the employment rates in these developing nations. So they are actually having these challenges of meeting employment issues in their native places. So thus we find that the more developed countries view immigration as a way to offset slow growth, while the less developed countries see it is less valuable today to allow immigration unchecked in their borders. So there are different situations for immigration. Today most developed countries have the intervention for immigration, wherein they are they really do not regulate it much. If the local nationals want to go and work abroad, that is not a problem for the West. But if you look at the less developed countries today, they have encouraged immigration rates to compensate for the lack of infrastructure and remittance benefit which they get. So in this slide, the idea was basically to focus that if you look at emigration, so most of the developing countries who are struggling to provide basic livelihood opportunities to the national, they actually they don't have any problem if people are going out, largely by and large, and plus they also get this benefit of remittances, and many times these remittances are coming in foreign currencies, so actually helping the sending nation, developing nations, both economically and also for the local household, it's quite helpful. However, in some countries, from the less developed world, this emigration is creating a problem of brain drain. So, at the one hand, you have less number of people who are, highly educated or skilled. At the same time, if they are leaving the ship and going to work outside for better opportunities, so the future prospect of training, new resources and, is really dampening the development potential in the developing nation. So that is a concern which several of these less developed nations are sharing. And so therefore, if you see, for the more developed nations, emigration is not a serious concern as compared to the less developed countries. So, what specific migration consequences are actually, considered as a problem in different part of the world, and why they are viewed differently by more developed and less developed nations. I think that is important, how the consequences of migration is viewed differently by the more developed world and less developed world. So one of the important impact which is critical for us to focus is impact on the size and growth rates of population. So as we know that because of international immigration, which is immigration, increases the size and growth rate of population at the country of destination and decreases the growth of population in the country of origin. And we know that this is possible because mostly the people are young in age who are migrating, so they are entering into marriages and then they are going for procreation. So when these migrants move from place of origin to place of destination, huge stock of young people are moving to a new place, and because they are in the reproductive age groups after marriage, if they are entering into reprocreation, of course that will contribute to a number of new births in the place of destination, and thus would not only contribute in population growth but rapid population growth. And the reverse consequence is that the people who are left over, are basically children and elderly, and hence the prospect of population growth at the place of origin becomes slow. So, however, we also note that the degree of impact of the growth of population will not be the same, so it depends on the size of population at the place of origin and at the place of destination. There are also some indirect effects or consequences of migration that can be felt on place of origin and place of destination, and that is very important for us to understand, because as migration takes place, which is a very selective process, it has a differential impact on fertility behavior of individual. Marriage rates are affected differently, and of course because of changing age composition of the population at the place of origin and destination, it also has a huge impact on the mortality risk and mortality levels at the place of origin and at the place of destination. So if you think about how these higher levels of migrants' fertility is actually working indirectly to increase the population growth in the destination countries, which is an important data that has been observed in different part of the world. And so therefore immigration in some more developed countries is keeping the population size away from actually coming down, means negative population growth rate. So in this way migration is helping countries to remain productive both economically and demographically, and their population is growing rather than coming down. The next important implication of migration is actually seen on the supply of labor force. So major concern is that impact of migration on the composition of population, particularly the receiving countries, and by and large it is related to the effect of composition of changes on the labor force. We know that migration being a age selective process, so most of the young people are coming at the place of destination, and so therefore there is a surplus of labor force supply in the market. So if the migrant labor is willing to work as good as the native worker at the cheaper rate, then he and she of course would get a better prospect of being hired than the native one. So there are a lot of challenges on this lines which are being reported. Now destination, most developed nations become benefit from the age selectivity of this migration, whereas you have these young labor migrants who are coming in, while for the less developed nations they are actually suffering because of this migration, because it actually leads to the deterioration of already increase in the ratio of the dependent population. So what is happening when these young people are moving out, so basically children and elderly are left behind. So in some sense, because of these migration of young people outside, we have the increasing dependency ratios which is rising in the low developing nations and creating the burden of poverty and deprivations and poor prospects of future development in these sending nations. If you look at the international immigration, basically they favor employable adults. So if you look at most of these international migrations which are happening in the United States, in Canada, in United Kingdom, Australia, so they are actually hiring people who are young adult with a very good skill set and education. They are welcome. Of course the number is restricted on an annual basis, but they are welcoming these stock. Similarly, on the other hand, if you look at a lot of people from Asia who are migrating to Gulf countries, are largely people who are not very educated and they have relatively lower skill set, but because the nature of job which are available in the Gulf countries, so these nationals are being regularly welcome over the last 2-3 decades. So in this way it is quite a win situation for the individuals and for the hire firms who are hiring these people and contributing to the benefit of economic growth for the destination countries. At the same time, what is happening is that when these young people, talented people, skilled people are going abroad, it is creating a situation of brain drain, which is very much detrimental for the development prospect of the nations, the developing nations, which have invested a lot and now is not able to capitalize on these investments. So therefore we see that migration is a very significant process for the development at the global level, and several migrant workers also send back remittances or earning to their families at native places. And this way, these remittances create a lot of opportunities of development prospects at the places of origin, in the less developed world, and also help the families to alleviate the burden of poverty and deprivation. It is also a very significant resource of foreign exchange which is available in the in the countries which are relatively less developed. So this is contributing to global development in the sense that helping the countries in the West to grow through the young, talented, skilled labor force. At the same time, these remittances and earning which these migrants are sending back to their native places, also helping to build back economy in these developing nations. And thus we see that this labor force migration effects is very mixed, and it's very difficult to draw a very simple conclusion because it is quite complicated and complex. As we may see that on the one hand they help us to reduce the burden of poverty among the households through remittances, but on the other hand also leaving others behind. So what is happening is, because of these remittances, in some cases it has been seen that some of the households which are receiving these remittances from abroad through their family members are improving economically, socially, etc. On the other hand, other households where you don't have people who are migrating outside for work, so they are economically and socially left behind. So in some sense, at the local level in most of these developing nations, these migration process and related remittances are actually perpetuating the burden of social and economic inequalities in a less developing world. So therefore, if you look at how migration is impacting development, it is quite challenging and it is very mixed. And very important contested impact of migration continues to be the social composition. And there is a huge debate, often in the public parlance and public circles, related to the impact of immigration policies of the most developed countries, who are often suspected of what is known as xenophobia, a fear or hatred of people from foreign lands and cultures. So often a lot of people have this inhibition and this fear that people from ethnically distinct foreign lands, what will they? It will actually lead an issue wherein they will be viewed as a problem by the native population. So often it is seen in, whether it is in America, Europe, Australia, many such places, wherein foreign people from different ethnic backgrounds are actually tabooed or viewed as sort of problem for them. I mean, this is a perceived notion, a xenophobic idea, unfortunately, which is seen in some of the cases on selective basis. So often it would be reported in various parts that these ethnic and stereotype is creating problem for their national development, and so therefore they are viewed as public threat for health, security. They are viewed as terrorism issues, criminalization, etc. And so therefore these all perspective has to be looked at and understood and seen that how migrants are contributing for global development. Thank you.